Hi guys, welcome back to the Banana Boy Variety Channel. As you can see by the title, I need you to watch this video before you watch my fights. Now obviously it's not mandatory that you do that, as it would never be. But I would prefer that you would do it that way. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be explaining the history behind things. So in order to understand why we see people wearing sand pails on their heads in this fight, well, that's because that's the Buckethead Empire. Now, that may sound comical at first, but it's really not when you think about it. When I explain about it, and then you think about what I explained about it. So the Buckethead Empire, you know, they're sitting. They start out with two guys. They're sitting in a pub, and they leave and they go to their hideout. And these two dudes they're hardened criminals. They're not, you know, they're not the guys you want to run into by accident. They're finding an old sand pail and they're wearing it on their head and they're laughing and stuff like that. And while the one dude gets like an idea, and they said, why don't we rob a bank wearing sand pails on our heads? And they're laughing. They're saying that's a good idea. So they went and robbed the bank in town. But the problem with these dudes is that they were so sneaky, they were so deceptive that nobody could ever find them. You know, the police, they find everyone. That's what everybody thought. Well, police can find everyone. Well, no, they can't. So when they started gaining members, because there were criminals out there who their methods of criminal were just not working out well for them. They were always getting caught, and they got caught a couple times, but they had sentences that they were able to get out. They didn't have like life in prison or something. So they wanted to learn how to be a criminal and not be caught. So they joined these dudes. So when they were joined, they learned all that, and they just started accruing members. You know, they just started bringing them in. And pretty soon, you know, they were leading raids on the police stations. They were raiding. The army was called in. They were ambushing the United States Army. And they could look, the United States Army, of all their tactics that they learned, they could not fight this gang. So pretty much all of the United States, everybody feared these people. So what the United States Army was, it fell. It could no longer, and by this point, this gang had so much members, so much power and arm strength that it became the government. It became, you know, it just like Adolf Hitler, it became the chancellor. He became the chancellor of the government, and then the vice chancellor was obviously the other dude in the gang when they started out as two dudes. So, and they started wearing sand pails on their heads. Now that may sound weird, but these sand pails, they were good. They were hard helmets, and that was basically the symbol of the might. So what happens is after they had so many members early, everybody just started joining them because they're like, well, I don't want to risk, you know, going against these dudes. So what they did, they got boats from the dead U.S. Army and they went overseas. And then this is kind of where I had before I started my YouTube channel. I was having all these fights. People were starting to, when they went overseas, they were starting to colonize other countries. They arrived on the coast of Spain. They had so much might that they literally took over Spain. It was just like Nazi Germany. They moved into they didn't take the same route that Nazi Germany did. They moved up Spain. They took all Portugal, all Spain, everything. Then they started moving into France, and slowly by slowly, they worked bars up. They like bars of land until they took over France. And people all over the world were so afraid of this. They're like, they don't even know, how does two-guy gang start into this? And it's hard to believe, but it happened. Not really, but this is all made up, but I'm making it up because you need to know the history of my fights. So they start moving into the Netherlands. They start colonizing all of the Netherlands. Then they move, what was the direction? East. They move east in part of Germany. On that little hook where it hooks into that part of land right on the Netherlands, and they moved into there. And then they stopped. They went back to the Netherlands. And they kind of just like kind of Nazi Germany did, they kind of left the United Kingdom alone for a little bit. They colonized bottom part of Britain. They held that part of the land, and they moved up into Sweden and Denmark. They colonized all that. And this is more modern times. They're starting to become an army. Well, as they're doing this, they're gaining enemies. There's resistance. And this is basically will start the resistance. They're known as the resistance. They will rise up and they will challenge the Buckethead Empire. The Buckethead Empire loses many battles against these resistance because they're basically becoming like the new army of the world. It's one world power. So now they're an official army. They're getting their own official weapons. Every man gets their own same weapon, just like a real civilized army was. Well, their next challenge was Russia. Now, Russia is all at this time, because this is modern times, so obviously Russia wasn't the Soviet Union anymore. So Russia starts moving in. They're thinking, well, we're big. We could stop this. Well, Russia moves in. But sorry for the commotion upstairs. But the might, politically and physically, was so powerful that they stopped all the Russian forces. They barricaded all of Europe. So when Russia was moving in, at the tip of Russia, you're going to start moving in, and then you're going to start arriving in Bulgaria, in Yugoslavia, and all those places. It's hard to explain without having a visual of it, which is what I should have did. I should have got a visual, but it's so if you're starting in Moscow somewhere, and then you start moving down the west of Russia, you're going to come down to the edge of it, basically, at some point, and they had it all blocked off. They had lines. They fought gentlemen's war like they did in Revolutionary War, but they would switch tactics to guerrilla fighting as they needed to. So if they were ambushed, they wouldn't be like the British columns were in the French and Indian War and stuff. They wouldn't like, oh, we're going to get, oh, and then they just falter. They wouldn't, like stand out in the open. These buckheads, they would retreat into that. But it was kind of hard as this army was growing so much. It was kind of hard for them to learn all these tactics, and it was kind of hard for them to basically, so some of them still did fight stupidly, but they had so much might, they lost. Losing a couple men didn't matter to them. So Soviets are defeated. So they start moving into Russia. They take part of it. They say, you keep coming at us, we're going to move more into your country. They're all like, okay. We still got Germany. Now, Germany lost 2 wars in the past. World War I, World War II. World War I, Germany lost. They had to change all their government. They had to abide by every country. They had these massive debts to pay. World War II starts. They lose. Adolf Hitler kills himself. All their Reich, they just lost. The Nazis have an interest. Maybe they can work with the Bucketheads to basically they collaborate and get the one world power that they want. But little do the Germans know that Bucketheads don't want anybody else helping them. The Buckethead Empire wants to rule the entire world as the Buckethead Empire. They want all races to bow down and worship the Buckethead Empire. They don't want everybody to bow down to Nazi Germany and the Buckethead Empire. They wanted just the Buckethead Empire. They said, okay, but Germany's going to help us, though. So we'll just make them think that that's what they're going to get, but it's not. So they do that. The Fourth Reich, we're coming up right to about the time I started making the old Bait New Boy Variety channel. So the resistance. And this is going to bring us to the figure of, what was his name? Rob Kerkedy. Rob Kerkedy is a dude who's just loafing about. He's trying to stay low in these times. Comes across the Colonel. The Colonel meets him in an alleyway, and he's like, who are you? He says, I need you to go infiltrate that factory up on the hill, the Buckethead Munitions Factory. And he's like, what? And everybody in the world at this point is still baffled that a gang that started out in the United States, it was 2 dudes who were criminals. Now they built up to a one world power army. And so he sends him up to the factory and he infiltrates it and he comes back and it's like, what kind of first impression of that is? I don't even know you. This is like, and basically what those two dudes became is the first two famous resistance fighters. They assemble resistance. The resistance gets its official uniform and stuff. And this brings us to several important battles in the timeline of this. The Battle of Grotage, which was a city, the Buckhead, Phil City in Washington. That isn't a real city, but it was. In this timeline, they occupied that. But ultimately, in the end, basically what happened is that the resistance lost on the wall of Czechoslovakia. There was a wall built. The resistance were trying to build a wall to keep the Bucketheads out, but they were just having to defend it. But the Bucketheads had so much might that they were just losing. The resistance just couldn't hold up. So what happened? They lost. The resistance had to go home. They had to go back to the United States, which was also under Buckethead rule. Rob Carradine shoots himself. The colonel dies. The general dies, I think. Pretty much all the main characters die. And then Nazi Fourth Reich, Bucketheads go to Nazi Germany and they said, "This is it. We lied to you. We thank you for helping us, but you are not getting out of this world power. It's all ours." Nazi Germany is like, whoa. But then we're like, well, you can't do nothing about it because we're going to come in here and we're going to make your country all water because they're just going to sink it into the ground. The Bucketheads have gotten hold of all the nuclear power in the world now, so they can literally just nuke Germany and just sink it into the ocean. So, still, the world wasn't fully colonized yet, and it won't be. Where this resistance story will start off in this video. But there is a lot of unrest. As with any crisis in the world, there's a lot of people that are on edge. Bar fights are going to break out, you'll see. And another fight that we're going to come to is Arena. This doesn't have anything to do with the storyline that I just talked about, but it's just Arena. Undead tournament we will be doing for the month of October, which is zombies, shotgun tournament, things like that. You'll see the title of those videos when you do, but that is basically where it is. The Bucketheads are doing right now. I'm just going to explain a little bit of what they look like. So this is just a regular Buckethead right there. Private, a rank of a private. This is all of the officers. This officers covers a wide rank of the officers. I believe that this was Blue Squadron Bucketheads. These are well-trained Bucketheads. And then a Blue Squadron commander is just going to have this over that. Partially, so you can see it's still Blue Squadron. Violet Squadron. This goes on here. And then Red Squadron. Even though this is not red, it's just Red Squadron. So those are this. And there's also a black one, which is the Elite Force of Bucketheads. So there's a lot of on and off battles. Right now the Bucketheads are the primary source. But the resistance are not dead, so what we're going to be doing when we move into our next story, or we move into our first story of the resistance, building up again and having fights with the Bucketheads. So thank you for tuning into that. That's me for today's video.